The courtroom was a cathedral of tension. Sunlight filtered through tall, arched windows, casting long golden stripes across the polished wooden floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, unnoticed by most, but in that moment every eye in the room seemed fixed on the small figure making her way forward. The toddler, barely 4 years old, walked slowly, her tiny shoes tapping lightly against the floorboards. Each step was measured, almost hesitant, as though she knew the enormity of the space she had entered. Her hand clutched her mother's tightly, fingers intertwined like fragile threads, yet there was a strange steadiness in her gaze. The judge's bench loomed high above the courtroom floor, a stern figure in black robes presiding over an atmosphere thick with expectation. He was a man who had seen countless witnesses, many seasoned professionals, some hardened by life, yet none had ever commanded a room in quite the way this child did. The gavel rested silently on the desk, a quiet promise of order and authority, yet even it seemed to bow slightly to the gravity of the moment. Lawyers whispered in hushed tones, papers shuffled, pens clicked, but their murmurs felt almost intrusive in the immense quiet that settled like a blanket over the room. Spectators sat in rows of wooden benches, the murmurs of curiosity slowly fading as every gaze turned toward the child. The air was thick with anticipation and a hint of anxiety. The town's collective breath seemed to pause, holding back for the first words of the tiny witness. Faces blurred into a sea of expressions: shock, curiosity, doubt, hope, and fear. Journalists with notepads poised for the first sentence of testimony leaned forward, while some members of the audience whispered prayers under their breath. It was not just a court case. It was a story that had captured the entire community, a tragedy that had left everyone searching for answers. At the side of the room, a K-9 officer sat on alert. The dog, a trained German shepherd named Rocco, exuded a calm authority, muscles coiled like springs ready to respond at a moment's notice. His ears twitched at every small noise, every shuffle, every whisper of movement, yet his eyes remained fixed on the child. There was a bond between the two, unspoken yet profound. The toddler reached out occasionally, brushing her fingers along the dog's fur, and in response, Rocco would shift slightly, a soft whine escaping his throat as if to say, "I'm here. I understand." For the officers and spectators, it was both unsettling and mesmerizing, the way innocence and trained instinct intertwined in such an extraordinary way. The toddler's mother, seated just behind her, whispered reassurances, though her own voice trembled with apprehension. "You're safe, sweetie. Just tell them what you saw." The child nodded slightly, a small movement almost lost in the immensity of the room but significant nonetheless. Her eyes were wide and dark, absorbing every detail, every expression, every flicker of movement. She didn't understand all the legal jargon or the tension in the air, but she understood one thing instinctively: people were looking to her for the truth, and she was determined to give it. The silence was suddenly punctuated by the clerk's voice calling the court to order. "All rise." Every person in the room stood, a ritual that underscored the seriousness of the moment. The child rose as well, wobbling slightly but holding her mother's hand tightly. She was dwarfed by the courtroom's size and the towering figures around her, yet there was an aura of calm determination about her that seemed to pull the room's attention inward, like a magnet drawing iron filings into a pattern. The judge gave a brief nod, signaling for everyone to be seated. The heavy silence returned, now even more profound, as all eyes fixed on the tiny figure at the witness stand. Attorneys took their positions. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Angela, adjusted her notes nervously, though she had faced countless witnesses before. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady but softened, aimed at the child. "Can you tell us your name, sweetie?" she asked. The question was simple, almost trivial, but the weight of the room made it seem monumental. The toddler's voice, barely above a whisper, replied, "Emma." It was a single word, yet it resonated like a bell through the courtroom. A ripple of tension eased ever so slightly. Rocco, the K-9, shifted closer, sensing Emma's need for comfort. He lowered his massive head slightly, letting her fingers brush against his snout. She smiled faintly, a shy expression that drew a collective sigh from the spectators. In that moment, the child and the dog were connected in a way that transcended words. The courtroom, despite its grandeur and intimidating formality, became a space of quiet understanding. Everyone instinctively leaned in, sensing that this child's perspective, so small and unassuming, might hold the key to unraveling the mystery that had gripped the town. The case itself had been complicated. A teenager had gone missing under circumstances that puzzled the entire community. Investigators had scoured the town for weeks, tracing every lead, questioning countless witnesses, and yet each path had ended in frustration. Rumors and speculation filled the air, adding to the anxiety of families and residents. The courtroom had become the last hope for clarity, a place where the truth, however painful or surprising, could finally emerge. And now that hope rested on a voice no older than 4. Emma took a small step forward onto the witness platform. Her shoes clicked lightly against the polished wood, a delicate, rhythmic sound that seemed to echo louder than it should. The judge offered a reassuring smile, though his eyes betrayed curiosity and awe. The attorneys leaned in slightly, their pens poised, ready to capture every word. The spectators held their collective breath. And through it all, Rocco remained steadfast, his eyes fixed on Emma, alert to every cue, every hesitation, every subtle indication of what might come next. As Emma positioned herself on the stand, she glanced briefly at the rows of faces. Some looked intimidating, some worried, some curious. She did not falter. Instead, she found comfort in Rocco's calm presence and in the gentle squeeze of her mother's hand. The child was a bundle of nerves, yes, but there was also something remarkable, a clarity of perception, a raw honesty that adults often lost over time. She could see details that others overlooked, the slight tremor of a lawyer's hand, the way a juror's eyes darted toward the door, the faint smell of the courtroom itself. The prosecutor, sensing the delicate balance of the moment, chose her next words carefully. "Emma, can you tell us what you saw that day?" There was a pause, pregnant with anticipation. Emma took a deep breath, the kind of deep inhale that only a child capable of extraordinary observation could take before speaking. She looked toward Rocco, almost as if seeking silent confirmation, and then began to recount the events in her own simple, unfiltered way. Her words were few but precise, colored by the innocent interpretations only a child could make. Every person in the room leaned closer. The jurors, trained to detect lies and omissions, found themselves captivated by her honesty. The attorneys, skilled in the art of persuasion, found themselves disarmed by the raw simplicity of her statements. Even the judge, who had presided over hundreds of cases, felt a twinge of awe at the sight of this small child holding the entire courtroom's attention. And through it all, Rocco responded in subtle ways, shifting his weight, lifting a paw, tilting his head, reinforcing Emma's words in a language only some could fully understand. By the time Emma finished her first sentence, the atmosphere had shifted. The courtroom's earlier tension transformed into a kind of reverent attention, almost sacred in its intensity. The spectators no longer saw a tiny girl on a witness stand. They saw a conduit for truth, a bridge between confusion and clarity. Every whisper, every movement, every subtle gesture seemed amplified in importance. And at the heart of it all was Emma, a child whose courage, honesty, and quiet confidence had already begun to change the dynamics of the case in ways no one could have anticipated. The silence returned once more, heavier than before, as the courtroom collectively processed the impact of the toddler's words. Emma looked down briefly, unsure if she had said enough, and then glanced at Rocco, who wagged his tail almost imperceptibly, reassuring her. Her mother's eyes glistened with pride and awe. For a fleeting moment, time seemed suspended. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law and procedure. It had become a theater of revelation, where innocence, perception, and instinct converged in a way that promised to unravel the mystery that had gripped the town. And as the sunlight shifted across the polished floorboards, casting golden stripes that seemed to highlight the little figure at the witness stand. Everyone understood one undeniable truth. The smallest voice, paired with the quietest observer, had the power to change everything. The heavy silence of the courtroom was no longer just anticipation. It was the calm before a revelation that would echo far beyond these walls. The town had not felt the same since the disappearance. It was a small, close-knit community, the kind where everyone knew each other's birthdays, pets, and family quirks. But in the weeks since the teenager vanished, the usual comfort of familiarity had turned into unease, suspicion, and whispered theories. Front porches that once rang with laughter now echoed with nervous glances. Neighbors lingered at windows, searching for shadows, their faces etched with worry. The local newspaper had published headlines almost daily. Missing teen sparks townwide search, community gripped by mystery, and authorities scramble for answers. Even casual conversations seemed to orbit the disappearance, no one able to escape its shadow. Detectives had combed through every detail, each clue dissected and re-examined. The teenager, 16 years old and full of life, had been last seen walking home from a friend's house. It was a familiar route, one that residents took for granted. Streets that were once safe now felt unfamiliar and menacing. Officers had canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing dozens of residents, checking security footage, tracking phone records, and following the faintest of leads. Every day brought frustration. Every night brought renewed worry. And yet, despite their best efforts, the trail had gone cold. The town's anxiety was mirrored in the courtroom that morning. Spectators whispered in tense clusters, many clutching their hats, scarves, or small children. The case had escalated from local concern to something larger, a story that had drawn attention from nearby cities and regional news outlets. Cameras lined the edges of the courtroom, reporters adjusting lenses and microphones in hopes of capturing a significant moment. Every adult in the room, from the attorneys to the judge, understood the weight of what was about to unfold. But perhaps no one understood it better than Emma, the toddler at the center of it all. Emma did not know the intricacies of investigative procedure or courtroom protocol, but she understood a truth adults often overlooked. Patterns mattered. Shadows mattered. Sounds mattered. Moments that seemed insignificant could hold enormous weight if someone noticed them. Her small mind had observed the world differently, cataloging things in an honest, unfiltered way. She remembered specific sounds from the day of the disappearance: the hurried footsteps on gravel, a low rumble of a car engine, and the metallic clang of a gate that no adult had heard clearly. These seemingly minor details had gone unnoticed by trained eyes, but Emma had seen them and she had remembered. Her tiny fingers rested lightly on the edge of the witness stand as she prepared to share her observations. Beside her, Rocco, the K-9 officer, remained vigilant. He was trained to detect faint odors, track missing persons, and follow the subtlest of cues. But today, he was not merely a tool of law enforcement. He was a silent partner in interpreting the child's recollections. Their bond was intuitive, almost instinctual. Emma's gestures guided him, her soft whispers alerted him, and in turn, his reactions validated her memories. Together, they formed an unusual but formidable team, capable of perceiving truths that escaped even the most experienced investigators. Detectives had long suspected that the teenager had been taken, though the motive remained unclear. There were theories of foul play, of a random act of violence, and even suggestions that the teenager had run away. Yet, each possibility had been carefully examined and found wanting. Family members, desperate for answers, attended the courtroom proceedings daily, praying that some breakthrough would finally come. The town's collective hope was fragile, hanging on threads of faith, persistence, and the belief that someone, somewhere, had seen or heard something crucial. Emma, with her innocent clarity, might just be that someone. The courtroom itself seemed almost alive with the gravity of the case. Wooden beams above were etched with decades of legal history, each scar a silent witness to countless trials, verdicts, and revelations. The polished floor reflected faces tense with worry, hands wringing, eyes darting between the child, the dog, and the attorneys. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. Even the judge, a man accustomed to the monotony of legal proceedings, seemed momentarily captivated by the scene before him. A 4-year-old girl, standing quietly yet confidently on the witness stand, had the attention of everyone in the room, and in many ways of the entire town. Emma began recounting the events she had observed. Her words were halting at first, cautious and measured. She described moments that adults would have dismissed as inconsequential: the sound of leaves crunching under someone's feet, a shadow passing too quickly across the sidewalk, a distant laugh that had seemed ordinary but now took on new significance. Her observations were precise, drawn from memory alone, unclouded by conjecture or fear. She didn't embellish or invent, she simply remembered. And in those memories lay the key to understanding the events leading up to the teenager's disappearance. Rocco reacted subtly, his ears tilting, tail shifting, and paws scratching lightly against the floor as Emma spoke. Each reaction corresponded to her statements, almost as if he understood which details were relevant. The detective assigned to the K-9 team, Officer Ramirez, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had seen trained dogs respond to commands and scents countless times, but never had he witnessed such a perfect synchronization between child and animal. It was as if they shared a private language, one that revealed what even the most diligent investigation had missed. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma continued. She pointed to specific locations on a large map laid out in front of her, describing subtle movements and actions. Her tiny hands traced paths that suggested an order of events, a sequence that hinted at where the teenager might have been taken. Lawyers scribbled notes frantically, judges leaned in closer, and the audience listened in rapt silence. The clarity of her observations was startling, the simplicity of her memory astonishing. What she recalled in innocent detail had eluded adults for weeks, yet here it was, finally illuminated by a child's perception. Outside, the town was abuzz. News crews had begun to gather updates, transmitting live footage of the courtroom proceedings. Families huddled around televisions, children clutched dolls while parents whispered prayers, hoping for a breakthrough. Social media lit up with speculation, questions, and admiration for the courage of the little witness. The story of the toddler and the K-9 began to spread beyond the courtroom, capturing the imagination of a town desperate for hope. It was a narrative of innocence, courage, and a bond that defied conventional logic. But it was also rooted in reality, and its consequences were about to ripple far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Emma's testimony unfolded slowly, each word carefully articulated, each gesture precise. She described a path through the neighborhood, minor details that adults had overlooked: cracked sidewalks, broken fences, and familiar smells of garden flowers that acted as silent markers in her memory. These details, combined with Rocco's trained instincts, allowed investigators to reconstruct the sequence of events in a way that was previously impossible. The room seemed to shift subtly as each detail added weight to the narrative. The audience's anticipation transformed into a quiet, awed respect for the child, whose observations were suddenly invaluable. The prosecutor, Angela, paused, carefully choosing her next question. "Emma, did you see anything unusual that day?" The toddler's head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing in concentration. She whispered softly, describing a fleeting movement behind a neighbor's hedge, the sound of hurried footsteps across the gravel, and a car engine idling near the edge of the street. The precision was breathtaking. Rocco's subtle reactions confirmed her recollections, almost as if the dog were silently saying, "Yes, this is important." The courtroom leaned forward, collectively realizing that the smallest observations could now unravel the town's deepest mystery. By the end of the testimony, it was clear: Emma's words were more than mere memories. They were evidence, detailed and credible, corroborated by the K-9's trained responses. The courtroom buzzed with a tense energy, a mix of awe, relief, and anticipation. Every person present, from seasoned lawyers to curious spectators, understood that a breakthrough was finally within reach. The case, once mired in confusion and unanswered questions, now had a thread, fragile, delicate, yet undeniable, that could lead to the truth. Outside the courthouse, the town waited with bated breath. The story of the missing teenager, once shrouded in fear and uncertainty, now had a spark of hope. Emma's courage, combined with Rocco's loyalty and training, had illuminated a path forward. It was a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked voices could hold enormous power, and that truth often reveals itself in the most unexpected forms. The town's heartbeat quickened in anticipation, knowing that the mystery, long a source of anxiety and sorrow, might soon be resolved. And so, the courtroom remained in that suspended moment, heavy with expectation. The silent bond between child and dog, the meticulous observation of a tiny witness, and the focused attention of a community all converged to create a turning point in a case that had shaken an entire town. Emma's bravery, her unfiltered perception, and the unspoken guidance of a loyal K-9 had begun to change everything. The story of the disappearance was no longer one of hopelessness. It was one of anticipation, courage, and the power of observation. From the moment she entered the courtroom, Emma experienced the world differently than the adults around her. To them, it was a space of law and order, solemnity, and rigid procedure. To her, it was a landscape of shapes, colors, sounds, and subtle movements, each of which told a story in its own way. The towering judge, the rows of unfamiliar faces, and the muted buzz of the courtroom all seemed simultaneously enormous and distant, like a stage set for an adult drama she only partly understood. Yet within her, a quiet sense of purpose flickered, an instinctive knowledge that she held a key the adults desperately needed. Emma's memory worked differently from theirs. While adults dissected logic and pieced together evidence, she captured images, sounds, and fleeting impressions. The day the teenager disappeared had left a vivid imprint on her young mind. She remembered the way the sunlight gleamed on the asphalt, creating a sharp contrast with the shadows of trees lining the street. She remembered the gravel crunching beneath hurried footsteps, a sound too subtle for most adults to register. She remembered a car's engine, idling just long enough to create a small vibration she could feel through the soles of her shoes. And she remembered a fleeting shadow behind a hedge, which she knew, even at her age, was something worth noting. Sitting on the witness stand, Emma's legs dangled above the polished wooden floor. She could feel the weight of everyone watching her, though she didn't fully understand why their gaze felt so heavy. Each pair of eyes seemed to demand a version of events she had never practiced delivering. But Emma was used to observing, used to noticing things that others overlooked. She looked at the K-9 beside her, the large German shepherd named Rocco, and drew strength from his calm presence. The dog's steady gaze reassured her. In a way she couldn't explain, she knew he would understand her exactly as she remembered it, wordless and honest. The sounds of the courtroom were a strange symphony. The murmur of spectators, the scrape of a chair, the faint scratching of pens on paper, it all blended into a single hum that Emma somehow filtered, allowing only the details she cared about to reach her conscious mind. She remembered the sound of the wind on the day of the disappearance, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog in a yard across the street. These were not just background noises to her. They were markers, little threads connecting events, creating a tapestry that only she could fully interpret. Emma's mind replayed the day in fragments. She saw the teenager waving goodbye to a friend, smiling in the warm afternoon sunlight. She remembered the sound of footsteps following, just slightly off rhythm, quick and uncertain. A car passed slowly by, its driver glancing briefly at the sidewalk. The teenager had turned a corner, and for a split second the world seemed normal. But Emma had noticed something adults had missed. A shadow moving in a way that didn't belong, a small detail that didn't fit the pattern of ordinary life. She didn't know names or motives, but she remembered everything she had seen, as if her mind had been a recorder left running on the day of the incident. She recalled how she had tried to tell her mother about it at the time. Her small voice had struggled to convey what she had seen, and adults had gently told her she was imagining things. But the image of that shadow, the sound of those hurried steps, and the vibration from the idling car had all stayed with her, etched in a way that felt important. In her young mind, she knew it was significant, even if no one else had recognized it yet. The events weren't scary exactly, but they had weight, a quiet urgency that she felt in her chest and hands. On the stand, Emma tried to translate what she had stored in her memory into words the adults could understand. "I saw someone hiding behind the big bush near the fence," she said softly, pointing with her small finger. Her voice wavered slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that everyone was listening intently. They were moving fast, like they didn't want anyone to see. The adults leaned in, some jotting notes, some exchanging glances. The words were simple, but they carried a clarity that adults often failed to achieve with careful questioning. Emma's honesty was unfiltered, her memory unclouded by assumptions or biases. Rocco, sensing her attention and the importance of her words, shifted slightly, nudging her hand with his snout. Emma smiled faintly, feeling validated. In that subtle connection she found courage. She remembered the car again, the quiet rumble, the way it lingered at the corner. "The car was there for a little while," she said, her voice calm, matter-of-fact. "It stopped, then it went fast when someone came out." She didn't dramatize the event, didn't add unnecessary fear or suspicion. She simply relayed what she had experienced in the pure, honest way only a child could. The courtroom responded in quiet awe. Observers realized that a child's perspective, unshaped by doubt, speculation, or fear, could reveal truths adults might overlook. Each small detail Emma provided was like a thread, connecting parts of a puzzle that had long resisted completion. She remembered the textures of the street, the shadows of the buildings, the slight variations in sound that adults couldn't discern. And she shared these memories with gentle confidence, guided by instinct and the subtle reassurance of Rocco's presence. Emma's perception of people was equally keen. She noticed the subtle reactions of adults around her, the slight frown of the prosecutor, the way a juror's hand trembled ever so slightly, the nervous tapping of a pen on the judge's desk. These weren't facts she would later use in testimony, but they informed her sense of the room's energy. Emma understood intuitively who was paying attention, who was skeptical, and who might be missing the significance of her words. It was a child's intuition, pure and unfiltered, yet it provided her a roadmap for navigating the adult world around her. Her memory wasn't linear. It was more like a collection of vivid snapshots. She recalled the laughter of a friend in the distance, the smell of freshly cut grass, the sunlight reflecting off a neighbor's window. Each of these sensory details acted as anchors, helping her reconstruct the sequence of events. As she recounted them in the courtroom, she noticed how Rocco's reactions aligned with her memories, alert at certain points, still at others. This bond gave her confidence, a quiet understanding that she was not alone in interpreting the significance of her observations. Emma's storytelling style was simple but compelling. She didn't embellish. She didn't try to guess motives or speculate about intentions. Instead, she relied on what she had experienced directly, filtering the chaos of events into small, manageable observations. "He ran past the corner," she said, pointing again. "Then the person hid behind the tree." She paused, glanced at Rocco, and continued. Each word, each gesture, reinforced the picture she had stored in her mind for weeks. For adults, it was almost like watching a magic trick. How could a child's memory be so precise, so structured, so undeniably useful? The courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, drawn into the rhythm of her recollection. Emma's mother watched with a mixture of pride and awe, knowing how much her daughter had observed but never fully realizing how critical it could become. The attorneys adjusted their notes, recognizing that each detail could shift the investigation. And the judge, silent and attentive, understood that history was being made, not in grandeur or ceremony, but in the delicate testimony of a small, perceptive child. By the end of her testimony, Emma had conveyed a clear, detailed, and actionable narrative. Her memory had reconstructed the day of the disappearance with astonishing clarity, aided by her natural observation skills and the silent guidance of Rocco. The courtroom, once tense and uncertain, now held a sense of quiet anticipation. The adults realized that the key to solving the case lay not in their assumptions or complex strategies, but in the honest, perceptive eyes of a toddler who had seen what others had missed. And in the stillness that followed, as the murmurs and scribbles of the courtroom staff subsided, Emma understood, without fully comprehending it, that her words could change everything. She didn't feel the weight of responsibility as an adult might. She only knew that she had shared what she remembered, that she had observed honestly, and that someone somewhere might finally act on what she had seen. For Emma, the world of adults had transformed into a place where her perspective mattered, where a child's honesty and observation could carry as much weight as the trained minds of lawyers and detectives. It was a profound realization, though one she felt more in instinct than in thought. She looked once more at Rocco, who gave a reassuring nudge, and in that moment, a quiet courage settled in her chest. The courtroom, heavy with silence, was now alive with possibility. The smallest witness, guided by instinct and accompanied by an extraordinary K-9, had begun to illuminate the path forward. Emma's perspective, the unfiltered, precise, and uniquely perceptive lens of a child, had begun to shape the narrative of a case that had confounded an entire town. Rocco, the German shepherd, had been a part of the local police force for nearly 5 years, and during that time he had experienced more crime scenes, searches, and tense moments than most humans would in a lifetime. He was a seasoned K-9, trained to detect the faintest sense, track missing persons across rugged terrain, and respond to subtle cues from his handler. Yet today in the courtroom, he was not merely a tool of law enforcement. Today, he was a partner, silently attuned to a child who held the key to unraveling an entire town's mystery. From the moment Emma had stepped onto the witness stand, Rocco had shifted his behavior. Gone was the calm, trained restraint he usually displayed in public. Instead, he positioned himself closer to her, his powerful body radiating a quiet, protective energy. His ears pricked at every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every faint sound echoing in the cavernous room. And when Emma's small fingers brushed against his fur, he responded with subtle movements, a tilt of the head, a shift of weight, a gentle nudge. It was as if he understood not only her words but the importance of her perspective. The relationship between Emma and Rocco was unusual. For a toddler, forming a bond with a trained K-9 might have seemed intimidating, yet Emma approached him with natural confidence and trust. She did not fear his size, his strength, or the disciplined intensity that defined his presence. Instead, she communicated with him intuitively, using gestures, whispers, and eye contact. And Rocco responded with equal clarity. The dog had been trained to detect scents and react to physical cues, but in this case, he was interpreting the child's memory, validating her observations, and signaling significance in ways that adults could only partially comprehend. Detective Ramirez, Rocco's handler, watched the interaction with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. He had trained Rocco for years, had taken him through countless exercises, and yet he had never witnessed a bond quite like this. The child's innocent observations seemed to unlock something in the dog, prompting him to behave almost as if he understood the narrative Emma was weaving. Ramirez noted how Rocco would subtly shift, pawing the ground, sniffing, and looking in the direction Emma indicated, reinforcing her testimony without a word. The precision of their partnership was uncanny, a collaboration that blurred the lines between instinct and intentional guidance. Emma's hand traced a path on the courtroom map, and Rocco's gaze followed it intently. When she described the shadow moving behind a bush near the corner, the dog's ears twitched, and he nudged her arm lightly with his snout. It was a subtle affirmation, a nonverbal confirmation that the detail was significant. In turn, Emma smiled faintly, feeling reassured that her observations were being understood, not dismissed. It was a silent conversation that few in the room could fully interpret, yet everyone sensed its weight. Adults leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously, trying to bridge the gap between child and K9. The courtroom atmosphere shifted as observers began to realize the magnitude of the collaboration. Emma's words were valuable, but paired with Rocco's instinctive reactions, they became evidence in motion. Each time she pointed or whispered, the dog's subtle responses drew attention to details previously overlooked. A crack in the fence, a patch of disturbed dirt, a faint trace of fabric, all were emphasized by the dog's nuanced behavior. Together, Child and Canine were reconstructing a narrative that adults had struggled to piece together for weeks. Rocco's training, meticulous and precise, allowed him to respond to subtle cues in ways that were almost imperceptible to an untrained eye. A slight lift of Emma's finger could trigger a sniff, a paw shift, or a turn of the head. Ramirez explained to the judge and jury that Rocco's reactions were deliberate, a combination of innate instinct and learned response. But in this courtroom, the dog's actions were more than protocol. They were a bridge between innocence and insight, a conduit through which the toddler's memory could be translated into actionable understanding. Emma, unaware of the strategic weight she carried, continued her testimony. She described sounds, movements, and fleeting images she had observed on the day of the disappearance. "I saw someone hiding," she whispered, pointing toward a corner on the map. Rocco responded instantly, nudging her hand, eyes fixed on the indicated location. The courtroom collectively leaned forward, tension thick in the air. Lawyers paused, reporters clicked cameras silently, and spectators held their breath. The subtle interaction between toddler and dog was as powerful as any formal testimony. It was a revelation unfolding in real time. Detective Ramirez had prepared for countless scenarios in his career, but never had he encountered a moment where a child's memory and a dog's instincts worked together so seamlessly. He watched as Rocco's behavior guided the courtroom's attention. "He's picking up on her cues," Ramirez whispered to the prosecutor. "These reactions are real, they're indicating relevance. This is more than training, it's instinct tuned by observation." The prosecutor nodded, eyes wide, realizing that the collaboration between Emma and Rocco might finally unlock the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. The dog's influence extended beyond the immediate cues. Jurors, initially skeptical of the child's ability to provide meaningful testimony, began to trust her account implicitly because of Rocco's responses. When the toddler indicated a hidden corner, Rocco's subtle nudges and attentive posture reinforced her words without interrupting the formal proceedings. Adults began to understand that the K9 was not merely accompanying her. He was validating her memory in ways that human witnesses could not replicate. Together, they formed a symbiotic unit capable of revealing truths hidden to even the most experienced investigators. Emma's focus never wavered. She spoke softly, deliberately, describing sequences of events that seemed trivial to adults at first glance, but were critical to understanding the disappearance. The dog mirrored her attention, tilting his head, adjusting his stance, and subtly guiding her gestures. Ramirez observed that these interactions, though gentle, were precise and meaningful. The combination of child and K9 created a dynamic that transformed observation into actionable insight. Each nod, each paw shift, each silent affirmation served to highlight the important details in Emma's testimony. The courtroom watched in quiet awe as Emma traced paths on the map, pointed to locations, and whispered descriptions. Rocco's reactions were almost imperceptible to untrained eyes, yet they carried enormous significance. A raised paw, a slight whine, or the focused intensity of his gaze communicated volumes. It was a silent dialogue, bridging the gap between childlike perception and trained instinct, between innocence and professional experience. Spectators began to recognize that the smallest gestures could hold monumental weight, and that Emma and Rocco were guiding the truth to light with subtle, almost imperceptible precision. Even the judge, a man accustomed to decades of courtroom proceedings, found himself captivated by the scene. He leaned forward on the bench, eyes narrowing in concentration. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured under his breath. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and admiration. Everyone understood that the dynamics of the case had shifted. No longer were they relying solely on recollections from adults or physical evidence collected weeks earlier. Now, the combined insight of a toddler and a K-9 was driving the investigation forward. Emma's testimony, paired with Rocco's behavior, began to illuminate the sequence of events leading up to the disappearance. The dog's trained responses acted as silent markers, confirming the significance of her observations. A slight tug on her sleeve indicated attention to a particular location. A subtle lean highlighted a minor but important detail, and his unwavering gaze reinforced her memory of critical events. It was a dance of precision, patience, and trust, one that transcended conventional courtroom dynamics. By the time Emma finished her initial testimony, the courtroom atmosphere had transformed. The tension that had previously hung thick in the air now carried a new energy, anticipation, and hope. Adults, who had once doubted the relevance of a child's memory, now understood that her observations, combined with the K-9's instincts, could provide clarity that no amount of conventional investigation had achieved. The smallest witness and a loyal, highly trained dog had begun to unravel the threads of a mystery that had confounded an entire town. Rocco, sensing that the critical portion of the testimony had concluded, relaxed slightly, though he remained alert. He sat beside Emma, head lowered but eyes watchful, ready to respond again if needed. Emma's small hand stroked his fur, a gesture of reassurance and gratitude. In that moment, the bond between child and K-9 was undeniable, a testament to trust, instinct, and quiet understanding. The courtroom, the town, and everyone watching recognized that the resolution of the case now rested on this extraordinary partnership. The connection between Emma and Rocco was not just functional, it was transformative. It demonstrated that insight could emerge from the most unexpected sources, that innocence and instinct could reveal truths overlooked by experience and expertise. As the courtroom prepared for the next phase of the proceedings, the realization settled in. The K-9 had become more than a companion. He was a guide, an interpreter, and a silent witness to the truth that only Emma could convey. Together, they had begun to shift the tide of the investigation, leading the town one step closer to answers. And as whispers circulated through the courtroom, murmurs of astonishment and admiration, it became clear that the partnership between child and dog had already changed everything. Rocco's subtle cues, Emma's precise memory, and the quiet synchronization of their efforts had provided a lens through which adults could finally see what had previously been invisible. The K-9 connection was more than a tool, it was a revelation, a bridge between perception and understanding, innocence and insight, that promised to unlock the mystery that had gripped the town for weeks. The courtroom had grown silent as Emma and Rocco's subtle interplay concluded their initial demonstration of insight. For the adults present, the tension was tangible, a mix of anticipation, disbelief, and hope. They had witnessed the extraordinary, a toddler's observations corroborated and validated by a highly trained K-9. Yet even as murmurs filled the back of the courtroom, no one fully grasped the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The revelation would come quietly, like a spark igniting a long-dormant fire, reshaping the understanding of a case that had held an entire town captive. Detective Ramirez leaned closer to the prosecutor, whispering about the significance of the details Emma had highlighted. "Look at how Rocco responded to the corner behind the fence. That's where the footprints we overlooked lead," he said, voice low but urgent. The prosecutor, Angela, nodded, her pen moving rapidly across her notes. The room seemed to pulse with energy, as though every breath held a secret waiting to surface. Emma, unaware of the tension she had helped generate, clutched Rocco's fur lightly, feeling comforted by his calm presence. It began with a single question, carefully posed by the judge. "Emma, is there anything else you remember from that day that might help us understand what happened?" The toddler's eyes narrowed in thought, and she let out a small, thoughtful hum. Then softly she began to speak. "I saw a red car," she whispered, pointing vaguely toward a corner of the map. "It stopped, and then someone got out really fast. They carried a backpack." The courtroom collectively leaned forward, each adult realizing that this simple statement might hold the key to the mystery. Rocco immediately reacted. His ears pricked, and he shifted closer to Emma's side. He pawed at the floor, nudging toward the exact spot on the map Emma had indicated. The subtle movements drew attention to a specific location, the one overlooked by investigators during earlier searches. Detective Ramirez's pulse quickened. He had trained Rocco for years to detect scents, track movement, and respond to cues. But the dog's insistence in that moment suggested more than routine. It suggested a connection to evidence yet undiscovered. Emma continued, "I think they went behind the big tree near the garage. I heard something drop." Her words were simple, yet their clarity was staggering. Adults often overcomplicate recollections, layering assumptions over memory, but Emma's observations were pure. Each sound, motion, and visual cue she described was direct, unfiltered, and precise. Rocco's responses aligned perfectly, as if he understood exactly what she was recalling. Jurors and spectators alike began to see the scene through her eyes, each detail illuminating a previously hidden narrative. Detective Ramirez motioned for two officers to follow Rocco outside immediately. The dog led them with instinctive precision, tracing the path Emma had indicated. The officers moved cautiously, aware that a critical piece of the puzzle might finally reveal itself. Outside, the town streets were quiet, lined with early autumn leaves rustling in the wind. Rocco's nose brushed the ground, sniffing faint traces carried days earlier, while his body remained tense with focus. Emma watched from the sidewalk, small hands gripping Rocco's fur as though guiding him through the search. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the occasional shift of Rocco's paws on gravel. Then, abruptly, he stopped. His body stiffened, head low, nose quivering. Detective Ramirez crouched beside him, observing the exact location. There, partially hidden under overgrown shrubs near the corner of an abandoned garage, lay a small, weathered backpack, the one Emma had described. It was scuffed, damp, and faintly carrying the scent of weeks-old earth, but it was unmistakably the missing teenagers. The revelation rippled through the team. This discovery provided the first tangible evidence since the disappearance. Back in the courtroom, the news arrived like a thunderclap. Reporters murmured, spectators gasped, and the judge leaned forward with an intensity he rarely displayed. Emma, clutching Rocco's fur, did not fully comprehend the significance of what had occurred outside. To her, it was another small piece of the puzzle, another memory confirmed. But the adults understood that this moment had shifted everything. A breakthrough had occurred, not through forensic analysis or complex deduction, but through observation, instinct, and the unlikely partnership of a child and a K-9. The backpack was carefully examined. Inside, officers found items that confirmed the teenager had been there: textbooks, a partially eaten snack, and a small notebook containing hurried notes. None of it suggested foul play, but it provided critical clues about the teenager's movements and location in the days leading up to the disappearance. Investigators pored over each item, connecting them to Emma's testimony. The child's words had guided them to evidence that would have otherwise remained hidden, and Rocco's instincts had transformed her recollection into actionable discovery. Yet the most profound revelation was not merely physical evidence. It was the validation of a principle long overlooked in adult reasoning. Perception mattered, even when filtered through innocence. Emma's memory, coupled with Rocco's responses, had illuminated a series of events with clarity that adults, with all their training and experience, could not replicate. It was a testament to trust, intuition, and the quiet intelligence of observation. The town, already captivated by the unfolding story, began to see the case in a new light, one where hope had returned, tangible and real. Detective Ramirez guided the search further, relying on Emma's continued observations and Rocco's refined instincts. Together, they traced faint footprints, overlooked paths, and subtle markers of human movement, constructing a timeline of the teenager's journey from disappearance to concealment. The deeper they delved, the clearer the narrative became, revealing twists and turns previously hidden by the complexity of adult assumptions. Each discovery reinforced the notion that the simplest observations could hold the greatest power. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor began weaving Emma's testimony into a coherent narrative, cross-referencing her statements with Rocco's validated reactions. The defense listened with cautious interest, aware that the combined credibility of a child's memory and a trained K-9 could not be easily dismissed. Witnesses who had previously struggled to reconstruct events now found clarity emerging from the simplest elements: a shadow, a sound, a scent, that Emma and Rocco had highlighted. The revelation was not just evidence. It was understanding, perception transformed into actionable insight. Emma, observing the renewed attention and quiet energy in the room, felt a small surge of pride. She had shared what she remembered, relying on instinct and simple honesty, and adults were finally responding with the care and urgency she had hoped for. Rocco, attuned to her emotions, nuzzled her gently, reinforcing the bond that had driven this entire breakthrough. The partnership between toddler and dog had created a ripple effect, influencing the course of the investigation in ways no one could have predicted. As the afternoon stretched on, more evidence surfaced. Investigators discovered discarded items, faint signs of movement, and environmental cues that corroborated Emma's testimony. Each piece, no matter how minor, connected to the observations she had made weeks earlier. The courtroom, once filled with uncertainty, now buzzed with focused attention. The revelation was complete. A clear pathway had emerged, linking the teenager's last known movements, the hidden location, and the physical evidence, all guided by the clarity of a toddler's perspective and the instincts of a K-9. By evening, the town had absorbed the news. Local reporters transmitted updates to neighboring cities, highlighting the extraordinary nature of the discovery. Social media erupted with admiration for Emma and Rocco, celebrating the unusual yet profoundly effective partnership that had finally illuminated the mystery. Residents, once paralyzed by worry, now clung to hope, recognizing that the most overlooked voices could contain the greatest truths. The case had been transformed, and the revelation had cast a new light on the town's darkest days. Even the judge, reflecting on decades of courtroom experience, expressed rare admiration. "We have witnessed something extraordinary today," he said softly, yet clearly, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom. "The truth has emerged not solely from evidence or testimony, but from observation, instinct, and the courage to speak honestly. It is a reminder that clarity often comes in the most unexpected forms." His words resonated throughout the room, reinforcing the significance of Emma's testimony and Rocco's role in validating it. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets grew quiet, the town began to exhale. Families returned home with a renewed sense of hope, knowing that the disappearance was now understood in ways previously unimaginable. The partnership between a toddler and a K-9 had revealed a series of truths that no amount of conventional investigation could have uncovered. It was a revelation of courage, perception, and trust, a reminder that even the smallest participants in a narrative could wield profound influence. And as Emma rested that evening, Rocco lying beside her in quiet companionship, the two of them shared a silent understanding. They had uncovered the first truths of the case together, guided by instinct, memory, and the unspoken connection between them. The revelation was complete, not merely the discovery of evidence, but the confirmation that insight could emerge from the most unexpected sources. The town's mystery, long shrouded in fear and uncertainty, now had clarity, hope, and a path forward. By the following morning, the discovery of the hidden backpack and corroborating details had shifted the entire trajectory of the case. The town buzzed with anticipation and quiet tension. Adults whispered in hallways, detectives huddled over maps, and journalists prepared their stories with a mix of curiosity and awe. Yet for Emma and Rocco, the day held a different kind of importance. It was the day the investigation would move from observation to confrontation, the moment where suspicions would meet reality and truth would stand unflinching. Detective Ramirez prepared carefully. The evidence, guided by Emma's observations and validated by Rocco's instincts, had narrowed the circle of suspects to one individual whose movements matched the toddler's recollections. Ramirez knew that the upcoming confrontation could be volatile. The suspect had a history of evasive behavior, and the psychological stakes were high. But the combination of Emma's eyewitness memory and Rocco's K9 precision had given the investigators something they had never had before: clarity. For the first time, they knew exactly where to look, what to question, and what to trust. Emma, unaware of the full gravity of the day, clutched Rocco's leash as the team prepared to depart for the suspect's residence. Her small hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the excitement that pulsed through her. She had watched adults take action countless times in movies and stories, but now she was a key part of real-life events, guiding them with honesty and instinct. Rocco responded to her energy with quiet attentiveness, his ears tilting, his body poised for action. The bond between the two had strengthened overnight, their silent communication refined and precise. The team approached the suspect's home with caution. The house, modest and unassuming, sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees whose branches swayed gently in the breeze. To an adult, the property might have seemed ordinary, mundane, but to Emma, the world of subtle observation revealed everything. She noticed the slightly ajar window, the faint discoloration on the walkway, and the shadow behind the fence, details adults might have missed, but critical in reconstructing the events that had transpired. Detective Ramirez gave Rocco a subtle nod. The dog's body tensed, nose twitching as he caught a faint scent. Emma's eyes lit up. She instinctively knew this was the moment where observation and instinct would converge. Together, Child and K9 moved forward, silent partners in the unfolding confrontation. The team followed, maintaining a careful distance, aware that the situation could escalate at any moment. Every step was deliberate, measured, and informed by weeks of preparation and insight. The suspect emerged from the house, initially unaware of the approaching team. He was startled, his eyes flicking nervously as he took in the sight of officers, Emma, and the imposing figure of Rocco. The German shepherd's presence was immediately commanding. Rocco did not growl, bark, or show overt aggression, but his body radiated authority. His gaze remained fixed, unblinking, and Emma's calm confidence beside him amplified the tension. It was a confrontation defined not by force, but by precision, observation, and the undeniable clarity of truth. Detective Ramirez stepped forward, voice steady but firm. "We need to ask you a few questions," he said. The suspect shifted uneasily, glancing at Emma and Rocco. There was a subtle flicker of recognition in his eyes, a sense that the small child and the dog held knowledge beyond what he could control. Emma, standing quietly beside Rocco, did not speak at first. She simply observed, noting the suspect's posture, the way his hands trembled, the avoidance of eye contact. Every movement confirmed what her memory had already suggested, and the K9's instincts reinforced her observations. "Where were you on the afternoon of September 12th?" Ramirez asked, his tone unwavering. The suspect hesitated, his words faltering. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. She remembered the sounds, the shadows, and the movements that had led to this precise moment. Rocco shifted, a subtle nudge, signaling to Ramirez that the suspect's reaction aligned with the child's testimony. The silent communication was almost imperceptible to others, but for the team, it was as clear as a map drawn in sunlight. Emma finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You were near the corner. I saw you carry the backpack. You hid it behind the tree. The words, simple yet precise, carried the weight of weeks of observation, memory, and instinct. The suspect's face changed instantly, a mixture of shock, fear, and realization. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the child's observations and the K-9's trained reactions had mapped his every movement, leaving him no room for denial. Rocco responded immediately. He stepped forward slightly, nose raised, ears alert. The dog did not attack. Instead, he created an aura of undeniable authority, a presence that reinforced Emma's words. Adults present felt the weight of the moment, understanding that the combined perception of child and K-9 had created a psychological pressure impossible to ignore. The suspect's composure cracked, revealing nervous gestures and subtle tells that confirmed guilt. Detective Ramirez continued with methodical questioning. He asked about the backpack, the movements near the fence, and the timeline of events. Each answer was met with a subtle reaction from Rocco, ears twitching, head tilting, paw shifting, signaling inconsistencies and truths. Emma's observations were validated repeatedly, turning her memory into a powerful tool of accountability. For the first time, the adult investigators were able to align human recollection, canine instinct, and physical evidence into a coherent, actionable understanding. The confrontation escalated quietly but unmistakably. The suspect attempted to deflect, to cast doubt on the narrative constructed by a toddler's memory, but every attempt was undermined by the precision of Emma's testimony and Rocco's reinforcing cues. Adults present began to appreciate the profound dynamic at play. It was not intimidation, force, or aggression that compelled truth, but observation, instinct, and the unshakable authority of clarity. The child and the dog had created a framework that left deception no foothold. Emma, sensing the shift, felt a quiet surge of courage. She didn't speak out of fear but out of conviction. Her words were measured, accurate, and unwavering. "I know what happened," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the suspect. "You can't hide it. I saw everything." Rocco responded instantly, stepping closer, body tense but controlled. The psychological impact was immediate. The suspect's shoulders slumped slightly, his gaze dropping, as if admitting silently that the truth could no longer be denied. The officers moved in carefully, ensuring that the suspect was detained without escalation. Emma watched with wide eyes as the culmination of her observations, combined with Rocco's instincts, brought the situation under control. She did not fully comprehend the legal and procedural significance, but she felt the gravity of her role. This quiet confrontation, guided by honesty, observation, and instinct, had produced results adults had struggled to achieve for weeks. Once the suspect was in custody, Detective Ramirez knelt beside Emma, whispering words of reassurance. "You did it," he said, voice filled with genuine admiration. "You and Rocco helped us uncover the truth." Emma smiled faintly, stroking Rocco's fur. She didn't need accolades. The bond and understanding between herself and the dog was reward enough. Yet she sensed that something extraordinary had happened, that her observations had changed the course of events in ways no one could have predicted. Back at the precinct, the officers cataloged evidence, cross-referencing Emma's testimony with physical discoveries, suspect admissions, and Rocco's indications. Each piece of information confirmed the narrative she had reconstructed with astonishing accuracy. The revelation of truth was now complete, anchored in observation, instinct, and the extraordinary partnership between a toddler and a K-9. The town, the authorities, and even the broader community would soon recognize that justice had been achieved not through conventional methods alone, but through perception, courage, and trust in unexpected sources. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the streets, the town began to exhale collectively. Emma, Rocco at her side, returned home under the warm glow of streetlights. Parents and neighbors offered quiet congratulations, marveling at the courage and insight displayed by a child who had become the linchpin of an entire investigation. Emma, unaware of the full extent of her impact, simply held Rocco's leash and smiled faintly, feeling a profound sense of connection and accomplishment. The confrontation had achieved more than the capture of a suspect. It had reshaped the understanding of perception, memory, and instinct. A small child's observations, coupled with a highly trained K-9's reactions, had illuminated truth where adults' assumptions and traditional investigations had faltered. The town had witnessed a rare and extraordinary convergence of innocence and experience, trust and instinct, observation and justice. Emma and Rocco had proven that sometimes the most unlikely sources hold the greatest power to change everything. And as the night grew quiet, Emma lay in bed with Rocco resting at her feet, both of them content in the knowledge that they had faced uncertainty, observed with clarity, and played a pivotal role in uncovering the truth. The confrontation, tense and extraordinary, had revealed not only the suspect's actions, but also the transformative power of perception, courage, and partnership. Together, they had illuminated a path from mystery to resolution, forever changing the lives of those involved and the community they served. The morning after the confrontation, the town was bathed in a soft, golden light, but the events of the previous day lingered like an unshakable presence. News of the suspect's capture had spread quickly, reaching every household, school, and business. Neighbors whispered in small clusters, marveling at the improbable partnership that had solved a case which had haunted the community for weeks. Emma, now at home with her parents, was blissfully unaware of the full extent of the attention she had drawn. All she knew was that Rocco, her steadfast companion, was beside her, and together they had helped people. Detective Ramirez, however, was acutely aware of the challenges and responsibilities that lay ahead. The investigation was far from over, despite the immediate success of the confrontation. The team had gathered critical evidence, secured the suspect, and confirmed details through Emma's testimony and Rocco's behavioral cues. Yet there remained questions about motive, timing, and any potential accomplices. Each piece of information had to be carefully cataloged, cross-referenced, and validated. Ramirez knew that thoroughness would be just as important as bravery. Emma's parents, meanwhile, were still grappling with the sudden attention their daughter had received. They marveled at her courage but also worried about the emotional impact of such an intense experience on a toddler. They tried to shield her from the adult complexities of the investigation, focusing instead on reassurance and normalcy. "You were so brave," her mother whispered, smoothing Emma's hair. "You helped everyone just by telling the truth." Emma smiled faintly, stroking Rocco's fur, a simple gesture of comfort that mirrored her quiet sense of accomplishment. At the precinct, Detective Ramirez and his team reviewed every piece of evidence. The backpack, the faint footprints, and other minor traces that Emma had indicated were now fully documented. Rocco's role in validating the toddler's observations had been invaluable. His subtle reactions had confirmed which details were critical and which were inconsequential. Ramirez reflected on the extraordinary nature of their collaboration. It was rare, even unprecedented, for a child's memory to be so precise, and for a K-9's instincts to provide confirmation with such clarity. The media, of course, descended with the speed of wildfire. Reporters and camera crews flooded the precinct, eager to capture interviews, photographs, and stories about the unusual dynamic between Emma and Rocco. Headlines described the toddler as a hero, often paired with images of the attentive German shepherd. While Ramirez recognized the importance of public transparency, he remained cautious, understanding that sensationalism could distort the narrative. Emma's role was extraordinary, but it was her observation, trust, and instinct, not theatrics, that had truly resolved the case. Despite the media frenzy, the town's residents reacted with awe and gratitude. Neighbors left small gifts and notes at Emma's home, praising her courage and kindness. Local schools began discussions on bravery, trust, and civic responsibility, using Emma and Rocco's story as an example of how even the youngest citizens could make a difference. The community had found a symbol of hope and resilience in a period of fear and uncertainty. Emma, of course, remained modest. To her, the excitement was secondary. What mattered was that people were safe and the truth had been revealed. For the officers involved, the aftermath brought a mixture of relief and reflection. Months of investigation had relied on traditional methods, interviews, and forensic analysis, yet it was the collaboration between a child and a dog that had unlocked the critical breakthrough. Detective Ramirez documented the procedures, ensuring that future teams could study and understand the dynamics at play. The case was more than just a solved mystery. It was a demonstration of how intuition, trust, and observation could complement formal investigative techniques in ways that were both extraordinary and replicable. Emma herself continued to demonstrate remarkable composure. During follow-up interviews, she recounted details of the day she observed the events without hesitation or embellishment. Her words were simple, precise, and consistent. Rocco remained by her side, his quiet presence a constant source of reassurance. Observers marveled at their silent communication, nodding the dog's subtle cues, a tilt of the head, a paw shift, a nudge to direct attention. These actions, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, had consistently validated the toddler's observations. Together, they had become an inseparable investigative team. Psychologists and child development experts were consulted to ensure that Emma's exposure to the investigation and subsequent media attention did not negatively affect her mental well-being. Sessions focused on helping her process the events in a safe, supportive environment. It was clear that Emma's natural resilience, combined with the comforting presence of her parents and Rocco, had enabled her to navigate the experience with extraordinary emotional stability. Experts remarked on the importance of her bond with the K9, noting that the trust and companionship had provided both confidence and a sense of safety during the intense proceedings. Meanwhile, the suspect remained in custody, and the legal process began its course. Investigators meticulously prepared the case, ensuring that Emma's testimony was corroborated by physical evidence and Rocco's validated reactions. Defense attorneys raised objections, questioning the reliability of a child's memory, but the combined weight of observation, instinct, and physical proof made the arguments less persuasive. Emma's precision, her consistency, and the unique confirmation from Rocco created a record that would withstand scrutiny. It was a reminder that truth could emerge through unconventional but undeniable channels. The town itself entered a period of reflection. Community meetings discussed how adults often overlook small observations, dismissing children's perceptions as trivial. Emma's story prompted dialogue about vigilance, civic responsibility, and the unexpected sources of insight within a community. Neighborhood watch programs were reinvigorated, not out of fear, but out of recognition that even the smallest details mattered. People began to look at their surroundings differently, appreciating the subtleties of movement, sound, and presence that could carry vital information in critical moments. Amid these reflections, Emma and Rocco returned to their daily routines. School, playtime, and quiet walks in the park offered normalcy after weeks of tension and attention, yet the bond between them had deepened immeasurably. Emma trusted Rocco in ways that transcended mere companionship. She relied on his instincts, subtle guidance, and calm reassurance. Rocco, in turn, responded with unwavering focus and attention. Their connection had grown beyond practicality. It was intuitive, almost symbiotic, a mutual understanding that shaped every action, gesture, and decision. Detective Ramirez often observed them during these quieter moments, reflecting on the unique dynamic that had resolved the case. He realized that traditional training, while essential, had limitations. The true breakthrough had been emotional intelligence, trust, and the natural perception of an unassuming child combined with a K9's refined instincts. It was a partnership that defied conventional understanding, illustrating the potential of collaboration across generations, species, and experiences. Ramirez made notes for future investigations, emphasizing the importance of unconventional methods in resolving complex cases. By the end of the week, The town had largely returned to its routines. Yet Emma's story remained alive in the community's consciousness. Children and adults alike spoke of bravery, observation, and trust in ways previously unconsidered. Schools held assemblies discussing how perception and honesty could shape outcomes. Adults reflected on their own assumptions, questioning what they might overlook in everyday life. The aftermath of the confrontation had become not just about resolution, but about the subtle yet powerful influence of awareness and collaboration. That evening, as Emma rested with Rocco at her side, she reflected in her own simple way on the journey she had experienced. The child understood the basics. She had seen, she had remembered, she had helped. But the depth of her impact, the profound changes her actions had initiated, was a lesson unfolding over time. Rocco, ever attentive, rested his head against her knee, a silent affirmation of the bond that had carried them through uncertainty, danger, and revelation. Together, they had navigated a world far beyond what most children, or adults, could comprehend. The town had gained more than closure. It had gained a story of resilience, courage, and unexpected heroism. Emma and Rocco became symbols of what could be achieved when trust, observation, and instinct were honored. The aftermath was not merely about legal resolution or public recognition. It was about community, perspective, and the quiet affirmation that even the smallest voices could carry the weight of truth. The events of those days would echo for years, shaping the town's understanding of justice, responsibility, and the value of listening to what might initially seem insignificant. As night fell, the streets were quiet once more and the lights of homes glimmered softly. Emma, tucked into bed, and Rocco, curled at her feet, shared a moment of peace and quiet pride. The aftermath was complete in its initial form. Justice was underway, evidence had been secured, and a community had found hope again. Yet the personal aftermath for Emma and Rocco, the bond strengthened, the confidence affirmed, the courage validated, would continue to shape their lives for years to come. They had changed a town, guided by perception, instinct, and trust, leaving a legacy that was as quiet as it was profound. The courtroom was quiet that morning, filled with a weighty anticipation that could almost be felt in the air. Weeks had passed since Emma and Rocco's extraordinary intervention had transformed the investigation, leading to the suspect's apprehension and the uncovering of critical evidence. Now, the trial itself was reaching its final stages. The town had been captivated, and even those who had been skeptical of the toddler's ability to contribute now listened intently. This was the moment when all the pieces, the observations, the instincts, and the evidence, would finally coalesce into clarity, and the community could begin to heal. Emma sat close to her parents, Rocco at her side, the German shepherd a calm and grounding presence. She was quieter than usual, absorbing the significance of the day in her own way. The weight of responsibility, while largely unseen by most adults, had been quietly carried by her through the previous weeks. Rocco's steady presence reinforced her confidence, as though silently reminding her that together, they had already achieved the extraordinary. Today, however, the extraordinary would become permanent, a resolution of not only the case, but also the lingering uncertainty that had gripped the town. Detective Ramirez and the prosecuting team presented the compiled evidence systematically. Each item, carefully documented, was connected to Emma's testimony and Rocco's validated reactions. The backpack, the footprints, and the timeline of the teenager's movements were no longer abstract concepts. They were tangible, undeniable, and irrefutably linked to the suspect. Ramirez watched closely as the jury absorbed every detail, knowing that the unusual combination of a child's memory and a K-9's instincts had created a foundation of truth that would be almost impossible to dispute. Emma's words were called upon once more, and she approached the stand with a quiet determination. She did not hesitate or falter. "I remember the red car," she said softly, pointing to the diagram of the location used during previous testimony. "It stopped, and someone got out with a backpack. I saw them hide it behind the tree near the garage." The courtroom leaned forward as she spoke, absorbing every word. Rocco, at her side, nudged her hand slightly as if to reaffirm that her recollection was correct. The subtle gesture did not go unnoticed. It was a silent validation of everything Emma had observed. The defense attorneys raised their objections, questioning whether a toddler's memory could be reliable, but the prosecution had anticipated this challenge. Detective Ramirez presented video recordings of Emma pointing out specific locations, combined with Rocco's consistent reactions to each cue. The dog's behavior, his attentive posture, precise nudges, and subtle signals, had been documented in detail, establishing a clear connection between Emma's testimony and real-world evidence. The combination of human observation and canine instinct was compelling and unprecedented, leaving little room for doubt. The courtroom waited with bated breath as the judge allowed Emma to step down, her task complete. The jurors, now fully aware of the meticulous corroboration between child and dog, were tasked with synthesizing the evidence. Outside the courtroom, the townspeople waited nervously for updates, their trust placed not only in the legal system, but also in the remarkable testimony that had reshaped the entire case. Emma and Rocco had given them a path to understanding, a pathway from fear, confusion, and grief to clarity and justice. During deliberations, the suspect remained under close observation, their demeanor noticeably altered. The confrontation had left an imprint, a recognition that truth had been unearthed not by intimidation or force, but by perception and honesty. The psychological impact of Emma and Rocco's combined presence was profound. The suspect's prior confidence eroded under the weight of corroborated evidence, leaving only acknowledgement of what had transpired and the consequences they could no longer avoid. Hours later, the jury returned, the tension in the room palpable. The foreperson spoke slowly, articulating the unanimous decision. "We find the defendant guilty as charged." A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. Relief, validation, and closure surged through those who had been anxiously awaiting justice. Parents held their children a little closer, friends embraced, and law enforcement officers allowed themselves a quiet, satisfied smile. For Emma and Rocco, however, the moment was quieter but no less profound. Their role in achieving justice had been monumental, yet their focus remained on one another, the silent understanding of a mission completed. Outside the courthouse, the town gathered in small groups, discussing the extraordinary sequence of events. Emma's story, paired with Rocco's unwavering support, had become a symbol of hope and trust. People spoke not only of the resolution of the case, but also of the broader lessons, the importance of observation, the power of honesty, and the unexpected ways in which even the smallest individuals could shape outcomes. Local news crews captured reactions, but the townspeople were most interested in internal reflection, marveling at the extraordinary unfolding of justice in their midst. Back at home, Emma's parents reflected on the weeks that had passed. They marveled at the bravery, precision, and calm courage displayed by their daughter. She had stepped into a world far beyond her years, observing and remembering details that adults had struggled to piece together. And Rocco, their steadfast companion, had provided not only validation but reassurance, his presence transforming fear into confidence. Together, the pair had changed the course of events, leaving a lasting impact on the community, the legal system, and even the adult perceptions of childhood capability. In the weeks following the trial, the town slowly returned to normal rhythms. Schools resumed classes, families attended routine activities, and businesses reopened after the disruption caused by the investigation. Yet Emma and Rocco's story remained a quiet, powerful thread in the collective consciousness. Neighborhoods initiated watch programs inspired by the case, emphasizing vigilance, trust, and collaboration. Parents encouraged children to observe, ask questions, and trust their instincts. The extraordinary events had reshaped the town's understanding of community, responsibility, and the significance of even the smallest observations. Emma, ever modest, continued her daily routines with a quiet confidence. Playtime, school activities, and walks with Rocco maintained a sense of normalcy, even as media coverage occasionally revisited the story. She understood, in her simple yet profound way, that her observations mattered, that honesty had power, and that collaboration could achieve results beyond imagination. Rocco's quiet companionship reinforced these lessons, a constant reminder of the bond that had guided them through uncertainty, fear, and revelation. For Detective Ramirez and the investigative team, the case became a landmark example of unconventional problem-solving. Reports were written, procedures documented, and methodologies evaluated. The role of perception, memory, and instinct, both human and canine, was recognized as a critical element in the investigation. Future law enforcement training incorporated lessons from Emma and Rocco's partnership, highlighting the power of trust, observation, and collaboration. The case had not only achieved justice, but had reshaped professional understanding of how insight could emerge from unexpected sources. The closure was not just legal or procedural, it was deeply emotional. Families and friends of the missing teenager expressed profound gratitude. The community, once gripped by fear and uncertainty, now embraced a renewed sense of hope. Emma and Rocco's extraordinary contribution had created not only resolution, but also a model for courage, persistence, and ethical clarity. It was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest voices and the most unassuming observers could illuminate truths hidden from even the most experienced eyes. Even months later, the town continued to celebrate quiet moments of recognition. Emma and Rocco remained local heroes, not for fame or accolades, but for the impact of their actions. Their story inspired writings, school projects, and local discussions about vigilance, ethics, and trust. The partnership between child and dog had shown that the combination of observation, instinct, and honesty could produce extraordinary outcomes. It was a story that transcended the initial events, a living testament to courage, collaboration, and the power of unexpected heroes. At night, Emma would often lie in bed, Rocco curled at her feet, reflecting quietly on the journey they had shared. She understood that she had played a role in something important, even if she could not fully grasp the full implications. Rocco's steady breathing, the warmth of his fur against her hand, and the silent reassurance they shared reminded her that courage was as much about companionship as it was about action. Together, they had faced uncertainty, guided by observation and trust, and emerged with clarity and resolution. The final closure, therefore, was as much about healing as justice. The town could move forward, families could rest easier, and law enforcement could refine their approaches. But the lasting lesson belonged to Emma and Rocco, that clarity, honesty, and collaboration could overcome fear, uncertainty, and even deception. The case, once shrouded in mystery, had become a story of empowerment, inspiration, and the extraordinary impact of trust, perception, and unwavering partnership. As dawn broke over the town in the days that followed, the streets carried a renewed sense of life. Children played, adults worked with a renewed sense of attention, and the community thrived under the quiet affirmation that justice and truth had prevailed. Emma and Rocco, ordinary in the eyes of many, had become extraordinary through their actions. Together, they had demonstrated that courage and perception, when combined with trust and companionship, could illuminate the darkest corners and restore hope where it had once been lost. And in the quiet of her home, as Rocco rested at her side, Emma drifted into sleep with the comforting knowledge that she had made a difference. The closure was complete, not only in law but in spirit. The town, the teenager, and the community could breathe freely once again, guided by the extraordinary courage of a small child and her loyal K-9 companion. Their story would be remembered not only for the resolution it brought, but for the enduring reminder that sometimes the most profound truths come from the simplest and most unexpected sources.